Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really excited to bring you today's video. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's get started. It was a hot June day in 2018. In Thailand's northern Chiang Rai region, the young football team known as the Wild Boars had just finished their training and decided to embark on a fun exploration trip. The team consisted of 12 players, aged 11 to 16, and their 25-year-old coach, Ekapol Chantawong. After training, they set off on their bicycles heading toward one of the largest cave systems in the region, the Tam Luang Nang Non Cave. This was a place the boys had visited before. However, this time, an adventure awaited them that they could never have imagined. The entrance to the cave was mesmerizing. According to legends, the cave was linked to a tragic love story from ancient times. Locals believed that the cave possessed mystical powers, but for the boys it was simply an exciting place to explore. Muddy, narrow paths, towering rock formations, and dark tunnels. The boys joked around with each other as they ventured deeper into the cave, accompanied by their coach. Ekapol was always mindful of the children's safety, guiding them and reminding them to be cautious. The boys wrote messages on the cave walls, leaving notes behind as part of their adventure. Their plan was simple: explore the cave for a few hours and then head back. But nature had different plans for them. June in Thailand marks the beginning of the monsoon season. However, the boys had no idea that such a sudden and intense rainfall would occur that day. As they moved deeper into the cave, the weather outside changed rapidly. Dark gray clouds covered the sky, and soon heavy rain began to pour. The monsoon rains quickly caused nearby rivers to overflow, filling the entrance of the cave with water. The ground outside absorbed the water rapidly, turning the cave's pathways into a muddy swamp. When the boys tried to return, they were met with a shocking sight. The entrance was completely submerged. The path they had taken had turned into a water-filled tunnel, making escape impossible. Panic set in as they tried to figure out what to do. Coach Ekapol did his best to keep the boys calm and prevent panic. He decided to lead them further inside in search of a safer spot. Navigating through narrow passages, they finally reached a drier and more secure area. However, they had no food or drinking water, and their mobile phones had no signal deep inside the cave. They were now completely cut off from the outside world. That night, when the boys didn't return home, their families became increasingly worried. Most of them had told their parents they would be home in the evening. But as darkness fell and there was still no sign of them, fear took hold. When the families found the boys' bicycles near the cave entrance, their worst fears grew stronger. Authorities were alerted immediately. The Thai Royal Police and Navy SEAL units were put on high alert. However, the cave was flooded, making entry extremely dangerous. Rescue teams quickly began strategizing how to locate the missing boys trapped inside. This was the beginning of a rescue operation that would capture the world's attention. Time was running out for the children trapped in the cave. While there, families and officials waited anxiously outside. Conditions inside worsened. The water level continued to rise, and the dark tunnels of the cave became even more terrifying for the boys. As rescue teams raced against time, the challenges ahead made the mission even more difficult. Officials swiftly formed a search and rescue team to locate the missing boys. Thai Navy SEALs, local police, and firefighters were immediately dispatched to the site. However, when they arrived at the cave entrance, they were met with a major problem. The rising water levels had completely flooded the tunnels inside. Rescue teams tried to estimate how far the boys might have gone inside. They studied maps and analyzed the structure of the cave. Tam Luang Nang Non Cave was like an intricate labyrinth stretching for kilometers. It was filled with narrow passages, sudden inclines, and deep water-filled tunnels. The boys had no way of knowing how far they had ventured, but they had likely moved to what seemed like the safest spot. Authorities called out at the cave's entrance, hoping for any sign of life from inside, but there was no response from the depths of the cave. Were the boys still alive? If so, how long could they survive? They had no food, no drinking water, and the oxygen levels inside could be dropping. The seriousness of the situation became evident, and international help was requested. Entering the cave was no easy task. The first rescue teams attempted to dive into the cave's waters, but the conditions were extremely challenging. The water was murky, visibility was non-existent, and navigating through the submerged passages was nearly impossible. The visibility was nearly zero. The underwater passages were very narrow. At many points, the divers had to pass through small gaps wide enough for only one person. This was a task much harder and more dangerous than a typical dive. Thai divers managed to progress only a few 100 meters into the cave, but as the water pressure increased and the passages narrowed, they could go no further. Since it was unknown how deep the children had ventured, exploring the cave became extremely risky. At this point, the Thai government made an urgent call to international cave diving experts. Soon, some of the world's best cave diving specialists headed to Thailand. Expert divers from the UK, the USA, Australia, and China arrived to join the rescue operation. These divers had experience working in narrow and underwater passages for extended periods. The British divers, John Valanthan and Richard Stanton, were the most experienced members of the team. They were among the few experts in the world who specialized in this kind of rescue operation. Along with them, other specialists examined the cave's structure and tried to develop a rescue plan. Meanwhile, the Thai government was working to lower the water level inside the cave using pumps and dams. However, the monsoon rains showed no signs of stopping, and the cave kept flooding. The rescue team was racing against time. The water level was rising, oxygen was running out. It was believed the children were struggling with hunger and thirst, and the biggest question still remained: were the 12 children and their coach alive? The rescue divers continued to progress inside the cave. For the first few days, no sign was found. There were no traces of the children, and no one responded. Every corner of the cave was being searched, but hope was gradually fading, until the night of the 9th day. On the 9th day, the British divers noticed something moving on a rock deep inside the cave. When they got closer, what they saw was a miraculous discovery. In front of them were the 12 children and their coach, alive. They were hungry, thirsty, and exhausted, but they were still breathing. Thus, this rescue operation was no longer just a search. It was now a massive struggle to bring them out safely. For 9 days, hope and fear had been intertwined. Families were anxiously waiting, unaware if their children were still alive. The rescue teams had been working tirelessly to make their way deeper into the cave. However, the monsoon rains and the cave's complex structure made the situation more difficult. Every day, the entire world was following this extraordinary operation in Thailand. But the true miracle happened on July 2, 2018, when British cave divers John Valanthan and Richard Stanton, deep inside the cave, noticed some movement on a rock outcrop. For humanity, this would become a historic moment. The British divers John Valanthan and Richard Stanton were progressing through the murky water with nearly zero visibility. Their flashlights could barely illuminate a few centimeters ahead. The divers carefully passed every meter, exploring each chamber of the cave. After advancing about 4 kilometers, they reached a section of the cave that wasn't underwater. As they reached the area, they noticed some movement on the rocks floating in the water. When they shone their flashlights, they couldn't believe their eyes. In front of them were the 12 children and their coach. They were all alive. When John Valanthan and Richard Stanton approached the stunned and exhausted children, there was a brief moment of silence. The children, seeing 2 strangers in diving gear, were initially confused. Then one of them, in a shaky voice, said, "Thank you." The British divers immediately called out calmly to the children, "How many of you are there?" One of the children responded, 13. This was the best news. No one on the team had lost their life. However, the children were hungry, thirsty, and exhausted. They had been trapped in the depths of the cave for 9 days, in complete darkness, struggling to survive without any food. The divers gave the children some energy gels and clean water. However, they had to be very careful as they knew the children's bodies, having gone without food for so long, wouldn't be able to handle too much. Some of the children looked weak and sick, But the greatest miracle was that they were all still alive. The children explained to the divers that they had tried to return when the rain started, but the paths had closed, trapping them inside. Later, under the leadership of their coach Ekapol Chantawang, they had climbed to a higher part of the cave to try and survive. Ekapol, despite having no food himself, had given all of his energy to the children to help them withstand hunger. By teaching them meditation techniques, he had prevented panic and calmed them down. The divers informed the outside world that they had found the children and their coach via radio. When this news was given to the families waiting outside, everyone was overcome with tears of joy. The world had learned about this miraculous discovery. However, there was a problem. How would they get them out? The obstacles in front of them were, the cave was completely flooded. The route from where the children had emerged to the cave entrance was about 4 kilometers, and most of it consisted of narrow underwater passages. The children couldn't swim. More importantly, cave diving, even for experienced divers, was extremely dangerous. The children surviving underwater for such a long time seemed nearly impossible. Time was running out. The oxygen level inside the cave was dropping quickly. As long as the rain continued, the water level could rise even further and completely fill the cave. The divers tried to boost the children's morale and told them they would return as quickly as possible. However, when the children asked, "Can you take us out now?" Valanthan and Stanton knew that it wasn't possible at that moment. At this point, an international plan needed to be developed to keep the children safe in the cave and find the best way to bring them out. When the divers returned, the news of finding the children spread worldwide. Television channels, newspapers, and social media announced this miracle. Families and people in Thailand were praying in temples, hoping for the safe rescue of the children. But the joy was short-lived, because this rescue operation was not over yet. The children had been found, but getting them out was going to be an even bigger problem. The Thai government, along with the best divers and rescue teams, began to discuss how they could get the children out. In front of them was a dangerous and deadly operation. And the only question on everyone's mind was, we've managed to keep these children alive, but will we be able to get them out of here safely? The children had been found, but getting them out was a much bigger issue. The Thai government, divers, engineers, and international rescue teams had to make one of the toughest decisions of their lives. They couldn't leave the children there because the oxygen level inside the cave was rapidly decreasing, and the monsoon rains could bring more water. But getting them out was a deadly risk. One of the biggest fears of the rescue team was that the children couldn't swim. Most of them were from rural villages and weren't familiar with open water like seas or lakes. Moreover, most of the passages in the cave were dark, narrow, and completely submerged underwater. Even for a diver, passing through these passages was a great risk. As the divers entered the cave, they crawled through extremely narrow tunnels. Some sections were so narrow that they had to remove their tanks from their bodies and drag them along to move forward. The visibility was almost zero. The water inside the cave was completely murky due to the mud and sediment. They could barely see their own hands. The currents were very strong. Due to the rain, the water inside the cave was constantly pushing the divers backward. Even the smallest mistake could be fatal. They had to find a way to get the children out of there. The rescue team came up with several different plans. Drain the water inside the cave. Huge water pumps would be used to pump the water out of the cave. However, because the monsoon rains didn't stop, the water level kept rising. Drill a hole through the mountain to get the children out. The idea of drilling a hole from above the area where the children were trapped was discussed. However, the cave structure was very complex and they didn't know exactly where the children were located. Get the children out with divers. This was the most dangerous plan. The children would be equipped with diving gear and, with the help of professional divers, would be guided through the narrow, water-filled tunnels of the cave. However, even for the most experienced divers, this process was extremely risky. In the end, the third plan remained as the only option. There was no other way to get the children out. While the rescue team was preparing for the operation, a tragedy occurred. Saman Kunan, a former Thai Navy SEAL, was tasked with placing air tanks inside the cave. In order for the divers to provide air support throughout the cave, oxygen tanks had to be placed at certain points. Saman Kunan was an experienced diver and had participated in many dangerous missions before. However, this operation was extremely challenging even for him. On the night of July 5, 2018, Saman Kunan dove into the cave to carry the air tanks. While placing the tanks, he realized that he had run out of oxygen. His oxygen supply was depleted. He lost consciousness before he could complete his way back. His friends tried to get him out, but it was too late. Saman Kunan had died. This was a huge shock to the entire team. If such an experienced diver had died here, what would the chances be for the children? But there was no turning back. The rescue operation had to continue. The rescue team devised an extraordinary plan to get the children out of the cave. The children would wear diving suits. Full face masks would be fitted to them, ensuring they would have constant access to oxygen. The children would be sedated. The biggest danger was the children panicking. If the children panicked underwater and obstructed the divers, it could become a fatal situation for both them and the divers. Therefore, Australian doctor and cave diver Dr. Richard Harris decided to prepare a special sedative, anesthetic, to put the children to sleep. Each child would have a diver accompanying them. The unconscious children would be gently guided through the water by the divers. This method had never been tried anywhere before. If the children had trouble breathing while unconscious, they could drown underwater. If the divers made a mistake, the operation could turn into a disaster. But there was no other option. They either had to take the risk and get the children out or leave them inside to die. This would become the largest and most dangerous rescue operation in Thailand's history, and when everything was ready, the whole world held its breath, waiting for this extraordinary operation to begin. Time was running out. The monsoon rains continued and the oxygen level inside the cave had dropped to a critical level. If the children stayed inside any longer, even breathing would become impossible. The Thai government and international teams approved the riskiest but only feasible plan. The children would be sedated, and each would be accompanied by an experienced diver through the narrow and dangerous underwater tunnels. This would be a rescue method that had never been attempted before in the world. And on the morning of July 8th, the whole world waited with bated breath for the brave operation to begin. With the start of the operation, the selected divers entered the cave fully equipped. First, oxygen tanks at the control points at the cave's entrance were checked. They proceeded for about 4 hours through the underwater tunnels to reach the area where the children were. One of the most critical points of the dive was the T-shaped narrow passage. To pass through this passage, the divers had to remove their tanks. When the divers finally reached the area where the children were, the most critical stage of the rescue operation began. It would be nearly impossible to get the children out of the water while they were conscious. The risk of panic was very high. They could run out of breath while passing through the narrow tunnels. One wrong move could endanger both themselves and the divers. Therefore, Australian cave diver and anesthesiologist Dr. Richard Harris administered a special sedative to each child. This medicine would render the children unconscious, but they would still be able to breathe. At the same time, a new dose had to be administered every 30 minutes, or the children might wake up. The divers had to constantly check if the children were breathing. This was an incredible risk. If one of the children woke up and panicked, everything could turn into a disaster. But there was no other option. Each child was fitted with a full face, mask, dressed in a diving suit and weight belt, slowly lowered into the water, attached to the chest of a diver. Since the children were completely unconscious, the divers carried them through the water like packages. Each diver carried a child in front of them as they made their way through the cave. During the rescue, the tunnels were so narrow that in some sections the divers had to lift the children in their arms and push them forward. Some sections were completely dark and visibility was zero. The divers continuously checked whether the children were breathing. This was an extremely slow and dangerous process. Each child was transported underwater for 5 hours until they were out of the cave. When the first child was brought out of the cave, doctors and medical teams immediately intervened. After hours of operation, 4 children were successfully rescued on the first day. News channels worldwide reported this success. However, there were still 8 children and their coach inside. The rescue team prepared to repeat the same process the next day. The first day of the operation had been successful, but the risk was still high. On the morning of July 9th, the divers entered the cave again and repeated the process. Everything was going according to plan, but this time, visibility underwater had worsened even further. Due to the monsoon rains, the water level had risen and the currents had become stronger. However, the divers stayed calm and carefully guided the children. After hours of operation on the second day, 4 more children were rescued. Now only 4 children and their coach remained. As the most critical stage of the operation approached, everyone prayed for a successful final day. On the morning of July 10th, the whole team prepared for the final dive. This was the riskiest stage. The monsoon rains continued, and the water level inside the cave had risen further. If the cave became completely flooded, it would be difficult for the rescue team to escape as well. Coach Ekapol was the last to be rescued. He wanted to make sure that all of his children were safely out. When the last group was lowered into the water, everyone was under immense stress. After hours of dangerous travel, the last child was rescued from the cave. And finally, Coach Ekapol also made it out safely. When the Thai government announced that the operation was successful, the world rejoiced. The children are out. They're all alive. All the children and the coach were immediately taken to the hospital. Doctors checked the children's health and declared that they were all fine. The rescue operation had been completed with great success, but the life lost of Saman Kunan was never forgotten. The divers, doctors, engineers, and volunteers who made the rescue possible had carried out one of the greatest rescue operations in human history, and the world had once again witnessed the incredible miracles that courage, hope, and human solidarity could create. On July 10, 2018, millions of people around the world took a deep breath in joy. The 12 children and their coach were safely rescued from the cave where they had been trapped for 18 days. This was a victory not just for Thailand but for the entire world. A miracle that pushed the limits of human solidarity and courage. The children, who had spent days without food, water, and in darkness in the cave, were quickly taken to the hospital by military helicopters after their rescue. Upon arriving at the hospital, they were placed in special isolation rooms. Their immune systems were weakened, so the risk of infection was very high. In the first few days, only liquid food was given, and a gradual transition to regular food was made. Psychological support was provided. Doctors regarded the children's survival as an incredible example of resilience. They had endured serious mental and physical trauma but managed to hold on to life. When their families saw them behind a glass partition in the hospital, they could not hold back their tears. They had finally been able to see their lost children after 18 days. From the moment the rescue operation started, the world media showed great interest in this event. CNN, BBC, The New York Times, Al Jazeera, National Geographic, and many international news channels followed the cave operation minute by minute. This was not just an ordinary rescue operation. It was a human struggle. People from all over the world prayed and wished for the survival of these children. The Thai government placed a large sign at the cave entrance to thank the rescue team. Endless thanks to the brave heroes from all over the world. And indeed, this operation became one of the greatest examples of international cooperation. More than 10,000 people from 17 countries, 90 professional divers, over 900 police officers, more than 2,500 soldiers, hundreds of engineers, doctors, and volunteers. This rescue was a miracle where not only the Thai people, but the entire world came together and worked towards a single goal. There were many heroes in this process. However, some names became unforgettable figures of this rescue operation: John Valanthan and Rick Stanton. They were British cave divers and the first to discover the children. At that moment, we all held our breath for the whole world, they said. Dr. Richard Harris, an Australian anesthetist and cave diver. He was the one who sedated the children and ensured their safe extraction. When the operation ended, he received the news of his father's death. Despite this, he continued his mission to complete the operation. Saman Kunan, a former Thai Navy SEAL and diver. He lost his life when he ran out of oxygen while placing air tanks. The Thai people gave him the title of national hero, and a large statue was erected in his memory. The Thai people, thousands of volunteers, worked during the operation. The local villagers helped drain the water from the cave by flooding their agricultural land. Without these heroes, the children might never have made it out. After the children were discharged, the Thai government launched a special program for them. Psychological support was provided. Physical rehabilitation processes were initiated. They were encouraged to continue their education. Many of the children chose different career paths after the incident. Some wanted to become professional footballers. Others chose to become divers and rescue workers. Some were inspired by the extraordinary event to become writers. And Coach Ekapol Chantawong decided to dedicate his life to meditation and child development. This event had such a massive impact that Hollywood and many major production companies moved to tell the story. The Rescue, 2021 National Geographic documentary. An impactful documentary that tells the behind-the-scenes of the operation. 13 Lives, 2022, directed by Ron Howard. A Hollywood film that narrates the rescue operation dramatically. Thai Cave Rescue, 2022 Netflix series. A Thai-made miniseries told from the perspective of the rescued children. These productions inspired people around the world and reminded everyone of how big of a miracle this rescue was. The Thai Cave Rescue operation went down in history as one of the greatest events showing how strong the human spirit can be. Courage and determination, human solidarity, the power of science and technology. This event proved that the human spirit will not give up, even in the toughest conditions. And the world will never forget the survival struggle of those 12 children and their coach in Thailand.